Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and this is going to be a quick break in the action. I know I had been doing that series of videos looking at the team position by position heading into the off season. Was away last week, so didn't get a video up last week on the offensive lineman. I'm working on that. I've almost got that ready to go. Probably put that up next week. But I want to take a break in the action. First of all, it's Super Bowl Sunday, but more importantly, for Eagles fans, last night the Hall of Fame made their announcement as to who is getting inducted in this coming year, and obviously the news came out that it's not going to include Brian Dawkins. And I just want to share my thoughts on that because it's just absolutely ridiculous that Brian Dawkins is not going to make it into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. I think it's very clear that he absolutely transformed the position of safety. Safeties play the game very differently today than they did before he was in the league, and he's the main reason why. He's the one that started making it a much more versatile position. He's the one that really started making it so that those guys could end up playing in coverage similar to like a cornerback does in one-on-one. He would come up and support the run. He would come in on blitzes. And that's shown by the fact that Reuben Frank put up yesterday before the announcement was made. But this stat just blows me away. And that is this. Name all the players in NFL history that have 25 interceptions, 25 forced fumbles, and 25 sacks. There's only one person on that list, and that's Brian Dawkins. And yet, for some reason, he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. And how that is, I have no idea. Now, I know that probably eventually he's going to get in, but I think it really speaks to some of the problems you've got with the Pro Football Hall of Fame and how they do their voting. And how they even look at the players and how they evaluate the players, because I think there is a definite bias when it comes to Hall of Fame voting, and it's all based on statistics. And I think it's based on the way this whole sports world has gone in general, not just football, but every sport in general is so focused on statistics. I don't know if it's because of fantasy football, if it's because of what people do when they're watching highlight shows and how they put all the statistics up at the end of the game and they look at individual player statistics. But statistics many times get overrated. Now, I know I threw the one statistic out earlier, but that just goes to show where there's someone that's only one person that's accomplished something. I think that says something. But when you're looking at statistics as a whole, in football especially, it really undervalues players. And it undervalues players because some positions, statistics really just don't come into play. I think of offensive linemen. I think of interior defensive linemen. I think of a lot of linebackers. I think especially of guys that are playing in the secondary that aren't playing at the cornerback position, the guys that are playing safety. And if you really look at the breakdown of who's made the Hall of Fame and who's not, position by position, I think it shows. And I think some of this is going to end up changing over the course of the next few years because of the way the game has evolved. So, for instance, if you look at the breakdown of who's made the Pro Football Hall of Fame position by position, some things really start standing out. So, for instance, if you look at just in terms of offense versus defense, and we're talking about players that played in the modern era, what's considered the modern era, which is 1950 forward. So we're not talking about guys that played back in the day. There are some guys that are in these statistics that played both ways, but for the most part, they had done away with the two-way players. But there are a few 1950 forward that did. Chuck Bednarik obviously comes to mind for Eagles fans. So there might be some double counting in this, but overall, you're going to get an idea of essentially what happens in some of these positions. So for instance, if you look at the breakdown of defensive players versus offensive players, there are 135 offensive players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There's only 88 defensive players. So right there already, there's getting a bias against guys that play play on the offense versus the defense. And if you look at the offense, it's the playmakers that are making it. So for instance, offensive linemen actually do have the most at 44, but consider the fact that they are almost half of an offensive squad. If you look at 11 players on the field, 5 of them are offensive linemen. So the fact that almost half of them are offensive linemen, but less than, we talk about basically a third of the guys on the offensive side of the football that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame are offensive linemen, already that statistic isn't quite what it should be. The next position is running back at the most, which has 32. And then you go to quarterback at 26. Now, I think that over time, that's probably going to change just because of the way the league has changed. And running backs just aren't quite as valuable to teams as they used to be now that the league is so pass happy. And that also goes then on the flip end of things in terms of wide receivers. Wide receivers is the next one, where there's 25 wide receivers in the Football Hall of Fame. So already, if you look at sort of the breakdown of where these guys are, right now the majority of them are at the running back position, then quarterback, then wide receiver, and there's only 8 tight ends in the Football Hall of Fame. So already you're starting to see that there's certain positions that are not valued quite as much. Even though the fact that there really are just as many tight ends on a team as there are running backs in terms of actual running backs. So you've got quarterbacks, you've got wide receivers, you've got running backs that are making it, but tight ends aren't making it, and offensive linemen aren't making it at the percentage that you would expect them to make when you consider the whole makeup of the team. But if we flip it and look now at the defensive players, like I said, already there's a lot fewer defensive players in the Hall of Fame than there are offensive players. But if you look at the breakdown sort of in the 3 segments, the defensive line, the linebackers, and the secondary is the lowest. And defensive line, no surprise, is the highest. And even among defensive linemen, defensive ends outnumber defensive tackles. So for defensive linemen, there are 37 defensive linemen in the Hall of Fame. There are 27 linebackers, and there are 24 defensive backs. And then if you go to the defensive backs, it gets even worse when you look at cornerbacks versus safeties, as there are 16 cornerbacks in the Hall of Fame and only 8 guys who basically played most of their career at safety. And if you look at guys that only played their career at safety, so you're taking Ronnie Lott out of the equation because he did play a few years at cornerback. If you look at only guys who played safety, the last guy that made it in as a pure safety retired in 1980. So that just goes to show that the Hall of Fame just is not looking at the safety position like I think they should, and especially the way the game has evolved so that the passing game is so much more prevalent than it was back in the day. You would think that it would be just the opposite, that more and more guys in the defensive back, and specifically safeties, would get into the Hall of Fame. And the simple fact of the matter is that safeties usually don't put up quite the numbers that cornerbacks do, that defensive ends do, that that linebackers do. So once again, it's weighted towards guys that get good statistics and against guys that are just good, solid players. And I think Brian Dawkins has sort of gotten caught in this, even though like I said, I think he really transformed the position. And then if you look at who did make the Hall of Fame this year, are you really going to say Brian Dawkins is not more important than a kicker? A kicker is going to make it into the Hall of Fame over Brian Dawkins? I mean, give me a break. Morton Anderson only has the stats that he has because he was in the league for so long. Over the course of his career, he was not more important to his team's success than Brian Dawkins was, as he was to the anchor to that defense that was so good for so many years, that got us to so many NFC Championship games and eventually got us to a Super Bowl. So you can't say that Morton Anderson was more important to his team than Brian Dawkins was. Kickers are, yes, they're the guys that end up scoring the points, but ultimately they're not getting anything if it's not for the rest of their team. And when you look at Brian Dawkins' career, it's just ridiculous that they're putting a kicker in over him. I know that there is generally a disregard for kickers in the NFL, and this is why. The fact that they get glory over guys that really break their butts and play really well for a number of years is ridiculous. And Brian Dawkins should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. And for that reason, the Hall of Fame has really gone down in my estimation. And the guys that vote on that are just a bunch of morons. Because the fact that they are putting in guys like Morton Anderson over him is just a joke. One more thing I'll say about this, just look at those statistics for Brian Dawkins over the course of his career. Though, if those aren't Hall of Fame numbers, I don't know what are. And if they aren't first ballot Hall of Fame numbers, I don't know what are. This guy was one of the best at his position for a number of years, and the fact that he is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame is a crime because he got robbed. All right, that's my rant on that. Let's take a look now real quick at the Super Bowl in terms of what I think and what my prediction is going to be for this game. First of all, right up front, I'm going to be rooting for the Falcons. I don't want to see the Patriots win again, so I'd love to see the Falcons. Plus, Matt Ryan is from the Philadelphia area, so I'll go for a local guy. And the Eagles beat the Falcons, so there's something to be said if the Falcons win that we can say we beat the Super Bowl champs. But when you look at the game, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think the Patriots I think this could end up being one of those games that becomes sort of a laugher. And in fact, you'll see, well, I'm going to give my final score in a minute, but my prediction for the score, I think it's going to be more lopsided than my prediction's even going to be, because I think what's going to happen is the Falcons might get some late points to make it look closer than it really is. And I know there's been a lot written about the fact that, the Falcons have this great offense and the Patriots have a great defense and who's going to win out based on those. But I think that's sort of missing the point that the Patriots offense is really good too. So let's take a look at the Falcons. Let's take a look, first of all, the Falcons offense against the Patriots defense. The Falcons were second in the league in yardage for the season. They were first in points scored. They were third in passing yards, and they were fifth in rushing offense. So they're at the top of the game in all of those statistics. But if you look at the Patriots, their defense is pretty good too. That's because they're 8th in yards, they're 1st in points, they're 12th in passing, but they're 3rd in rushing. So you can see already that the Patriots defense is pretty good. And when you factor that against the other side of the ball in terms of what's going to be happening, Patriots offense against Falcons defense, I think that's where it starts to really show. That's because the Patriots are also really good in all those offensive categories. They're 4th in yards, they're 3rd in points, they're 4th in passing, and they're 7th in rushing. So once again, all top 10 stats for all of those. You look at the Falcons defense, and it gets scary. They're 25th in yards. They're 27th in points. They're 28th in passing. Think about that. Tom Brady against the 28th ranked defense. And they're 17th in rushing. And think about it this way. They're 17th in rushing, so that's probably their best statistic. But when they played us, which was I think week 10 of the season, they were 7th in rushing. And we sort of showed the blueprint that you could run the ball against this team. And after that, they dropped down to 17th over the course of the season. So that means that towards the end of the season, teams were running against them. And so the Patriots really can pick however way they want to go against this team. I think this defense is bad, and that sort of sets up for a bad situation. When you've got a good offense against a good defense, that can be a great game. But the problem is, on the other side of the football, you've got a great offense against a bad defense. So that's where I think this is sort of becomes a problem, because Matt Ryan and the Falcons are going to have to try and match the Patriots point for point, and that's just not going to happen because the Patriots defense, I think, is just a little bit too good. So for that reason, I am going to go ahead and I am going to pick the Patriots in this game. My prediction for the score is going to be Patriots 38, Falcons 27. Like I said, I think that's going to be a little misleading. That looks still like it's an 11-point difference, but I think it could be a lot worse than that. I think it could be a situation, like I said, where the Patriots get a big lead and then maybe they give up a couple late touchdowns to make the game look a lot closer than it is. It could be something like 38-13 or something like that going into the fourth quarter, and then the Falcons get a couple scores to make it look better than it was. So that's sort of my thoughts on the game. Leave your prediction below. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the Super Bowl. Let me know what you think about the Brian Dawkins snub. Do you really think that that's a crime like I do, and that he should have been in on the first ballot? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Like I said, next weekend I'll go ahead and continue my series looking at the team position by position. Specifically, I'll be doing offensive linemen, which really has some interesting things now that I've gotten into it and looking at some of the things that they could be doing on the offensive line in the offseason. That's going to be a real interesting position to watch. So I'll be talking about that next weekend. Until then, fly Eagles fly.